The mysterious fate of America's Viking colonists. It began with a story that sounded impossible. Nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic, a band of fearless Norse explorers set foot on the shores of North America. They crossed an ocean that many believed was endless, navigated without compasses, and established what may have been Europe's first settlement in the New World. But just as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished. No farewell, no final battle recorded, no clear explanation, only abandoned ruins, and one of history's greatest mysteries. For centuries, historians debated whether the Viking tales were nothing more than legends. Medieval Icelandic sagas described a lush land far to the west called Vinland, where wild grapes grew, rivers teemed with salmon, and forests stretched farther than the eye could see. The stories sounded almost mythical, and many scholars dismissed them as fiction. That changed in 1960. On the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada, archaeologists uncovered the remains of an ancient Norse settlement at Meadows. Turf houses, iron working tools, nails forged in Viking style, and unmistakable Scandinavian artifacts proved that the sagas had contained a remarkable truth. The Vikings had reached North America nearly 5 centuries before Columbus, but that discovery only deepened the mystery. If they had successfully crossed the Atlantic and built a settlement, why didn't they stay? To answer that question, we must travel back to the end of the 10th century. Life in Greenland was harsh. Although Eric the Red had founded Viking colonies there around 985 AD, survival was a constant struggle. Winters lasted for months, farmland was scarce, and every resource had to be carefully managed. Wood was especially valuable. Without enough timber, building ships, homes, and tools became increasingly difficult. So when rumors spread of a fertile land farther west filled with forests, the opportunity seemed too valuable to ignore. Around the year 1000 AD, Leif Erikson assembled a crew and sailed into the unknown. Guided only by the stars, the position of the sun, and generations of sailing knowledge, they crossed one of the world's most dangerous oceans. Against incredible odds, they reached land. Unlike icy Greenland, this new coast was covered with trees. Freshwater streams flowed through the landscape, wildlife was abundant, and the climate seemed surprisingly mild during the warmer months. For explorers accustomed to barren shores, it must have felt like discovering another world. The Vikings quickly began constructing buildings using timber frames covered with thick layers of turf. They established workshops where iron could be produced from local bog ore, a remarkable achievement considering how rare iron production was in newly established colonies. They repaired ships, stored supplies, and explored the surrounding coastline. Everything suggested they intended to stay, yet this wasn't an empty land. Long before the Vikings arrived, indigenous peoples had lived across these regions for thousands of years. They understood the seasons, hunted the forests, navigated the rivers, and knew every part of the landscape far better than any foreign visitor ever could. The Norse sagas referred to these people as Skraelings, a name whose exact meaning remains debated today. Early encounters may have been peaceful. According to the sagas, the two groups exchanged goods. The Vikings offered cloth and metal objects, while indigenous communities traded animal furs and other valuable resources. For a brief moment, cooperation seemed possible, but peaceful first impressions can change quickly. The Viking settlers were few in number, isolated from Europe by thousands of miles of open ocean and completely dependent on uncertain supply lines. Any misunderstanding could have enormous consequences. According to the Icelandic sagas, tensions eventually erupted into violence. Accounts describe surprise attacks, confusion, and fierce battles that forced the Norse to defend themselves. Whether every detail is historically accurate remains uncertain, but most historians agree that relations between the settlers and local indigenous groups likely became increasingly difficult. Even if the Vikings won individual skirmishes, they faced an impossible reality. The indigenous population vastly outnumbered them. Every injured settler weakened the colony. Every damaged ship threatened their connection to Greenland. Every passing winter made survival more uncertain, and conflict may have been only one of several deadly challenges waiting for them. The environment itself was proving far less welcoming than the first explorers had imagined. Storms regularly battered the coastline, making sea travel dangerous. Winters remained long and unforgiving. Food supplies depended heavily on successful hunting and fishing seasons. A single failed expedition could place the entire settlement at risk. Still, the settlers endured. Year after year, they struggled to maintain their fragile foothold in this distant land. But then, something changed. Within only a few years, activity at the settlement appears to have stopped. The workshops fell silent, the fires went out, the buildings were abandoned, and the people who had crossed an ocean to build a new future simply disappeared from history. The question is, did they choose to leave, or were they forced to? In the next part, we'll examine the strongest theories behind the disappearance of America's Viking colonists and the surprising evidence that continues to challenge everything we think we know. For generations, people imagined that the Viking colony had met a sudden and violent end. A surprise attack, a brutal massacre, or a disaster so devastating that no one survived to tell the story. But archaeology paints a very different picture. When researchers excavated the settlement at Meadows, they found no evidence of a large battle. There were no mass graves, no burned buildings, and no signs of widespread destruction. Instead, the settlement appeared to have been abandoned in an orderly manner. Many valuable tools had been taken with the settlers, suggesting they left by choice rather than in panic. So if they weren't wiped out overnight, why would they abandon a land that seemed so promising? One explanation lies in simple mathematics. Unlike later European colonies, the Viking settlement was incredibly small. Most historians estimate that only around 70 to 100 people may have lived there at any given time. That number was far too small to create a self-sustaining colony for generations. Every illness, every accident, every failed hunting season reduced the community's chances of survival. Even finding marriage partners would have become increasingly difficult in such an isolated settlement. Without regular arrivals from Greenland or Iceland, the colony was slowly running out of people. Distance made everything worse. The voyage between Greenland and North America was one of the most dangerous sea journeys in the medieval world. Powerful storms, floating ice, dense fog, and unpredictable winds could destroy a ship within hours. Every supply voyage risked never returning. A colony separated by thousands of miles of ocean could never rely on quick assistance. Then there was a question of economics. Although Vinland offered forests filled with valuable timber, transporting that wood back to Greenland required enormous effort. Ships had limited cargo space, voyages were dangerous, and maintaining a permanent settlement simply to collect lumber may not have been worth the cost. From a Viking perspective, seasonal expeditions could have made far more sense than permanent colonization. Another challenge was the changing climate. During the Viking Age, the North Atlantic experienced a relatively warm period known as the medieval warm period. These milder temperatures made exploration easier and allowed Greenland's colonies to survive. But climates never remained constant. As temperatures gradually cooled over the following centuries, sea ice increased, growing seasons became shorter, and farming became even more difficult. Although the major cooling known as the Little Ice Age occurred later, even small environmental changes could have made life in Vinland increasingly unpredictable. For settlers already struggling with isolation, conflict, and limited resources, nature may have delivered the final blow. Yet perhaps the greatest obstacle wasn't weather or warfare. It was loneliness. Imagine living at the edge of the known world. Every letter from home took months or years to arrive, if it arrived at all. Every repair depended on your own skills. Every mistake could be fatal. There were no nearby allies, no large towns, and no guarantee that another ship would ever appear on the horizon. The psychological burden alone must have been immense. Eventually, the leaders of the settlement may have reached a difficult conclusion. The risks outweighed the rewards. Instead of dying in Vinland, they simply packed their belongings, loaded their ships, and sailed back to Greenland. If that's true, then the mystery isn't how they disappeared. It's why no one returned. Some researchers believe the Greenland colonies soon faced problems of their own. Trade with Europe declined, resources became scarcer, and by the 15th century, Greenland's Norse settlements had also vanished. The people who once knew the route to Vinland may simply have disappeared before they could pass that knowledge to future generations. Over time, memories became legends, legends became myths, and myths were dismissed as fantasy. For nearly 900 years, the world forgot that Vikings had ever reached America. Then came one of archaeology's greatest discoveries, when Helga Ingstad and Anstein Ingstad uncovered Meadows in 1960. History books had to be